I told Dad what I heard just outside the glass elevator. Before he could even ask, "What?" she, my stepmother, slapped me. The sound cracked across the marble lobby, echoing off slogans about ethics and transparency. What she didn't know? I run integrity and risk, and the high-definition security camera, the one aimed right at us, recorded everything. My name is Mara Quinn. I am 28 years old, and I am the head of ethics and risk for the Quinn Stratagem Group. Monday, 8:52 a.m. The Northbridge Tower lobby is a cathedral of commerce. Designed to intimidate, 4 stories of pure, untinted glass overlook the Grayford estuary, reflecting the cold, gray morning light. The marble underfoot is imported calicotta, polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the digital stock tickers that run in silent, green and red ribbons along the brushed steel walls. The air is pressurized, scrubbed clean, chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling of nothing but success and the faint, chemical tang of industrial-grade glass cleaner. We were the founding family, a tableau of corporate power making our way from the executive parking elevator. My father, Daniel Quinn, the chairman and founder, flanked by the 2 most important women in his life. He built this empire from a 2-room office, and now, at 64, he was a prisoner in his own tower. His suit was Savile Row, bespoke and perfect, but his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, were exhausted. Beside him, Sloane Archer, the CFO, his wife of 5 years. She is all performance and restless energy. Her posture is perfect, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon that looked painful. She is the financial miracle the business journals write about, the one who navigated us through the post-pandemic supply chain crisis. She is also, I knew, a black hole of ambition. And me, Mara Quinn, the Nepo baby appointment, according to the whispers in the cafeteria, the soft spot, the one Sloane thought she could manage. The lobby was humming, the low roar of 100 quiet conversations, the shush of the escalators carrying analysts to their cubes. I waited until we passed the main security desk, entering the clear zone before the executive turnstiles. I timed it for maximum visibility and minimum audio spill to the general floor. I leaned into my father's personal space, forcing him to focus on me, pitching my voice beneath the synthetic chime of the internal news ticker. "Dad," I whispered, "I heard something you need to know about Sloane and the Flow Fund." He hadn't even processed the words. His brow just started to furrow. "Mara, what?" Sloane's reaction was thermonuclear. It was not a thought. It was a reptilian instinct. Her hand, the one holding her $1,000 leather portfolio, dropped. Her other hand snapped out and seized my left wrist. Her grip was astonishingly strong. Her manicured nails, painted a deep, arterial red, dug into the soft skin just above my watch. The ambient lobby noise seemed to fade to a dull buzz. She pulled me half an inch closer. Her eyes, a pale, icy blue, were wide with a sudden, primal fury. Her expensive vanilla perfume was a cloud, thick and choking. "You lying," she hissed. The words were venom, spat directly into my face. And then, the slap. It was a pivot from the hip, all her weight, her right palm connecting with my left cheek. The sound was horrific. A sharp, wet crack. It was louder than the traffic outside, louder than the tickers. It echoed, a single, shocking percussion in the marble canyon. I felt the shockwave of it reverberate through my jaw, stinging my teeth. My eyes watered instantly, a purely involuntary response to the impact. And the silence. Everything stopped. That is the detail my risk analysis brain logged first. The cessation of motion. Every single employee within 50 yards froze. I saw it all in a fragmented, high-definition sweep. A junior analyst, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. 2 receptionists at the front desk, hands hovering over their keyboards. The shush of the escalators seemed to stop. The world held its breath. They stared, mouths open, processing the impossible. The only thing that moved was the digital ticker tape on the wall. QSG plus 045. QSG plus 045. I didn't flinch. I didn't recoil. I took the hit. The pain was immediate, a blinding, white-hot flash that blossomed from my cheekbone to my ear. I tasted copper. Marcus, the security supervisor at the main desk, a big guy who usually just nodded at us, was already on his feet. His hand was halfway to his radio. Ms. Archer, Mr. Quinn, is everything… Sloane recovered in a millisecond. She was the consummate professional. She dropped my wrist as if it were burning. She smoothed the lapel of her stark white blazer, a flicker of sheer panic in her eyes, before it was immediately replaced by icy, controlled disdain. She turned to Marcus. "It's fine," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the stunned silence, commanding normalcy. "She just tripped. Clumsy. Weren't you… Mara?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned to my father, her public face clicking into place. He stood frozen, his expression slack with shock, his face pale. "Daniel, we are late for the pre-market call. The analysts are waiting." I remained perfectly still. I let them all look at me. I let them see the red, angry handprint already blooming on my skin. I let them process the vast, undeniable difference between Sloane's words, tripped, and the violence they had just witnessed. My cheek felt huge, swollen, a throbbing beacon. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my chin. I ignored my father. I ignored Sloane. I looked past the 1,000-pound stratagem sculpture hanging from the ceiling. I found it. Dome camera 4A, Pelco, 4K resolution, 30 frames per second. Its lens was aimed directly at this patch of floor. It's the camera that covers the executive access point. A tiny, insistent, ruby-red light was blinking. Recording. "You're beautiful." I thought, "Sloane, my God." My father's voice was a rasp. He looked at the bright red handprint on my face. He looked at Sloane, who was vibrating with suppressed adrenaline. "What did you do?" "She's lying. Daniel," Sloane said, her voice dropping instantly, becoming intimate, wounded. "She's trying to cause trouble. You know how she gets. You know she resents me." He hesitated. That hesitation was everything. He was a man caught between his legacy, me, my mother's daughter, and his present, Sloane, the woman who ran his books and shared his bed. He didn't know what I'd said. He just saw the explosion. And Daniel Quinn hates explosions. He wants quiet. He wants compliance. He needed it to be a mistake. But my stillness, and Sloane's vibrating rage, told him it wasn't. I breathed, inhale. The air stung my raw cheek. Exhale. The pain was grounding. It was proof. My brain was already processing, the internal checklist running. Event, 08-52-14. Physical assault, assailant, Sloane Archer. CFO, victim, Mara Quinn, head of risk. Witnesses, approx. 30-40 employees. +2, level 3, security personnel. Assets, video feed, camera 4A, clear line of sight of impact. Video feed, camera 2B, east entrance. Captures the group approach. Audio, lobby ambient microphones. High probability of capturing Sloane's dialogue. Lying. Tripped. This was not a domestic dispute. This was a corporate officer assaulting the head of risk in the company lobby, immediately after being questioned about a financial fund. It was a gift, wrapped in pain. Motion at my periphery. Teresa, the lobby manager, was hovering. She looked terrified, caught between two warring planets. "Ms. Quinn, your mask." She held out my black N95. I had been holding it in my hand, ready to put it on for the elevator ride. It must have flown out of my grasp when Sloane grabbed my wrist or when my hand recoiled from the slap. I took it from her shaking fingers. "Thank you, Teresa. I'm fine." I looked down at the mask, and there, stark against the black fabric, was a powdery, beige smudge. Sloane's foundation, La Mer, shade creme. It was the residue from her palm. She had slapped me so hard. Her makeup had transferred to her hand, and then, in the chaos of the grab or the follow-through, onto my mask. Tangible, physical proof, a link. I closed my hand around it, bag it, tag it. Sloane was hissing at my father. "Daniel, we are leaving, now." She was trying to drag him away, to control the narrative, to get him upstairs where she could manage him. "Mara," my father pleaded. His voice was weak. "What did you say to her?" I ignored him. I looked directly at Sloane. She met my gaze. Her eyes were triumphant, believing she had silenced me. She thought this was a family fight she had won. She had no idea this was a compliance review. I reached into my blazer pocket. My phone felt cool and solid. I unlocked it. My hand was not shaking. The pain in my face had sharpened my focus to a razor's edge. I opened my encrypted messaging app, the one linked directly to the company's general counsel and my own forensics team. The recipient group was Legal Ethics Hold. I typed one word: record. I hit send at 08:53:01. The automated receipt was immediate. Protocol 9. Ethics Hold. Activated. All AV data from asset tags. Lobby Main, Lobby East, Exec 11 Bank, 08:45:09 Huntro. Secured in immutable cold storage. Chain of custody initiated. Legal counsel notified. Sloane finally succeeded in pulling my father toward the turnstiles. "We will discuss this family matter tonight," she spat back at me, a final twist of the knife. I just stood there, holding my phone and the mask. I watched them go. The lobby was slowly, awkwardly coming back to life. People were whispering, pretending to look at their phones, but stealing glances at me, at the red mark on my face. The trap was sprung, the bait was taken, the evidence was secured, and Sloane Archer had just handed me the weapon I needed to save my father's company from her. The sting on my cheek felt like a victory. I rode the staff elevator to the 34th floor, the one that smells like industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. I needed the anonymity. The executive elevator, with its silent magnetic glide and mirrored walls, was too much. I didn't want to see my own reflection. Not yet. My office is a glass box, a fortress of transparency at the end of the ethics and risk wing. My desk is a single, 8-foot slab of gray, cold-rolled steel, sterile, controlled. I lock the door. The heavy thud of the magnetic bolt engaging. My cheek was on fire. I pressed a cold bottle of water from my mini-fridge against the skin. The condensation instantly stinging. The sharp, violent crack of the slap still echoed in my ears. I looked at my reflection in the dark surface of my monitor. Mara Quinn, head of ethics and risk, a red handprint, the faint outline of 4 fingers and a palm, was blooming on my left cheek. It was a physical violation of the sterile world I had built. It was also, I reflected, the end of a 5-year truce. That handprint brought the past rushing in. I wasn't 28. I was 23, standing in the back of the Grayford Art Museum, wearing an ill-fitting gray silk dress. It was my father's wedding. It was less a celebration of love and more a corporate merger. Daniel Quinn, the visionary founder, acquiring Sloane Archer, the brilliant, ruthless financial strategist who was half his age. The event was catered, curated, and cold. There is a photograph of that day hanging in the Legacy boardroom on the 42nd floor. It's 12 feet wide. My father looks triumphant, rejuvenated, his hand locked with Sloane's. Sloane is smiling, but her smile is one of acquisition. She isn't looking at him. She's looking at the camera, at the future shareholders, at the empire she has just secured. Sloane wasn't just a new wife. She was, according to the Grayford Business Journal, the golden financial hand of QSG. She had arrived during the apex of the post-pandemic supply chain crisis, a time when our logistics were hemorrhaging cash and our net revenue was in freefall. She didn't just stop the bleeding. She cauterized the wounds with brutal efficiency. She consolidated debt, renegotiated 3-decade-old supplier contracts, and within 18 months had the cash flow charts pointing sharply upward. She was hailed as a savior. My father, in his relief, saw her as infallible. I, on the other hand, was the Nepo baby. When I was appointed head of ethics and risk, the whispers were loud enough to be heard over the hum of the HVAC. The boss's daughter, a soft-touch job to keep her busy while the adults talk. What's she going to do? Report on stolen office supplies? They didn't know I'd graduated top of my class at Wharton with a dual concentration in forensic accounting and behavioral ethics. They didn't know I'd spent 3 years at a brutal DC-based risk consultancy that specialized in dismantling international fraud rings. Sloan, in fact, had championed my appointment. She thought she was installing a harmless figurehead, a family member who would rubber stamp her maneuvers. She mistook my quiet nature for compliance. She thought the ethics office was a place for posters about recycling, not a forensics lab. This was the central theme of our family, the perfect public surface, rotting from within. We maintained the illusion at mandatory Sunday dinners. They were held in the cavernous, empty dining room of my father's mansion, a house my mother had decorated, a house Sloan now occupied. Every single dinner ended the same way. Sloan would raise her crystal glass of overpriced Cabernet. Her hand, the same hand that just struck my face, would be covered in diamonds. To family, she would toast, and then her favorite benediction, delivered with a warm, convincing smile aimed squarely at my father. Family is the priority. Work is just the tool we use to protect it. What beautiful, empty hypocrisy. Work wasn't her tool to protect the family. It was her weapon to leverage it. My father, a man who could dismantle a hostile takeover in a single afternoon, was utterly blind. He was desperate for a partner, for someone to share the burden he'd carried alone since my mother died. Sloan was that partner. More importantly, she was the key to his final, crowning achievement, the IPO. Taking Quinn Stratagem Group public on the Armitage Exchange was his obsession. It was the validation of his entire life's work. He saw Sloan as the one who could get him there, the one who could make the books so clean, so stable, that the underwriters would beg for a piece. "She's stabilizing us, Mara," he'd tell me, his voice filled with a conviction I hadn't heard in years. "She is getting us across the finish line. We need her." He needed her, and because he needed her, he refused to see her. I saw her. My soft-touch job gave me admin-level access to the system logs. 6 months ago, I found the crack. Sloan had instituted a new vendor qualification protocol. On the surface, it was brilliant. She called it the vendor sandbox. It was a new layer of verification, designed to stress-test new suppliers before they were integrated into our main multi-billion-dollar supply chain. It looked like the very definition of prudence and risk management. But it was a shell game. This new protocol required a third-party testing partner to approve and facilitate pilot funds for these tests. This new entity sat in a perfect, opaque blind spot, a shadow company that sat between our procurement department and the actual suppliers, an entity that didn't have to follow the same rigid audit trails as our established vendors, an entity whose approval hierarchy terminated, I discovered, in a single encrypted mailbox. I tried to warn him. Once, I caught him in his study, the one place Sloan rarely entered, the one room still smelling of my mother's old books and his cigar smoke. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, non-confrontational. "This new sandbox protocol for vendors, it's opaque. The payment structure to the testing partners bypasses our standard triple-check compliance. It's a risk." He didn't even look up from the IPO prospectus he was reading. He waved a hand, a gesture of pure dismissal. "Mara, that's Sloan's domain. She's saving us millions in potential fraud. It's brilliant." I'm not questioning the theory. Dad, I'm questioning the method. The routing of the pilot funds is invisible to my department. That's not just a risk. It's a structural vulnerability. He finally lowered the papers, his eyes tired and, to my shock, angry. "Don't be suspicious. Mara, Your job is to manage actual risk, not invent theoretical ones. Sloan is under incredible pressure. The underwriters love the sandbox. Support Sloan. Just support her. Support Sloan. The family motto. The corporate directive. That was the last time I spoke of it. That was the duality of Sloan Archer. In the dining room, she was the devoted wife, her hand always finding my father's, tracing the lines on his palm. Her laughter light and melodic. She was reassurance. She was stability. In the boardroom, she was a predator. She didn't hold hands. She held the numbers. She'd eviscerate a department head's entire budget with 3 surgical questions. She never raised her voice. She just presented the data, and the data always proved she was right. In the dining room, she held my father's hand. In the boardroom, she held the company's throat. After that day in the study, I learned my lesson. I stopped being his daughter. I became the head of ethics and risk. My silence for the past 6 months was not weakness. It was not surrender. Silence, I learned, is the perfect medium for data collection. Silence is where you listen to the digital whispers. It's where you watch the access logs at 2 a.m. It's where you trace the flow of pilot funds from the vendor sandbox into the ether. It's where you cross-reference Shell Corporation filings in Delaware with the incorporation dates of Archer Trust Services. My silence was not passive. It was the careful, patient act of building a case. It was the gathering of data. It was the loading of a weapon. I pressed the cold bottle to my cheek again. The skin was numb now. My father told me to support Sloan. He told me not to be suspicious. He taught me, in that moment, to be quiet. I've been quiet long enough. The slap in the lobby this morning wasn't an act of power. It was an act of panic. She heard my whisper, Sloan and the Flow Fund, and she reacted. She broke the perfect surface. She showed the entire lobby the violence that lay beneath the golden hand. She thought she was silencing me. She had no idea she had just given me my opening argument. The silence, as of 9:00 a.m., was officially over. To understand what happened in the lobby, you cannot see it as family. Family is emotion. Family is chaos. What happened in the lobby was a system breach. A high-level operator, Sloan, panicked and defaulted to a crude, physical denial of service attack. She did this because I had just named her exploit. To understand the exploit, you must first understand the system. Quinn Stratagem Group is not a simple company. We are a $2.4 billion strategic consultancy. We don't sell products. We sell predictive models, logistical solutions, and geopolitical risk analysis. Our client list is a roster of the Fortune 50 and the U.S. government. We hold sensitive defense contracts. We manage supply chains that feed entire cities. QSG is a fortress, and its currency is trust. The walls are thick for a reason. The power within this fortress is mapped onto the 42nd floor. The executive wing. This is the chessboard. At the head of the table sits the board of directors. It is an entity of 6. First, my father, Daniel Quinn, the founder and chairman. He is the heart, the visionary, the moral compass everyone assumes is still pointing true north. His power is foundational, driven by legacy and personality. But he is tired. Beside him, Sloan Archer, the chief financial officer. She is the brain, the calculator. Her power is absolute and mathematical. She controls the treasury. Every dollar that flows into QSG, every dollar that flows out, passes through her office. And critically, she controls the vendor sandbox, the opaque, discretionary fund she created to test new partners. It is her personal, unaudited kingdom. Then, the COO, Pierce Latham. He is the hands. He runs operations. Every consultant, every project manager, every logistics hub reports to him. If Sloan is the what, Pierce is the how. He makes the trains run. His power is logistical. Finally, there are the 3 independent directors, a retired 4-star general, a former SEC commissioner, and the dean of a tech university. They are the jury. They are meant to be the check and balance against executive overreach. They are, in theory, the ultimate authority. But a jury is passive. It must be presented with a case. This is the power map: my father, legacy; Sloan, money; Pierce, operations; and the independents, judgment. My position exists outside this primary structure. The legal department, run by a man named Garrett, reports directly to the board. This makes legal inherently political. Garrett's job is to protect the board, which often means protecting the executives from the board. My department, ethics and risk, is different. I was chartered with a unique mandate. I do not report to the CEO or the CFO. I report, technically, to the audit committee, which is run by the independent directors. But my access is what matters. Legal sees the contracts. I see the metadata. I have keycard-level access to the system logs, the email archives, the server activity. Garrett's team can be lied to. The CM log cannot. I am the company's digital conscience. It's all-seeing eye, a position Sloan insisted I take, believing the eye would remain loyally blind. All of this is set against the ticking clock. The initial public offering. We are scheduled to list on the Armitage Exchange in less than 90 days. This IPO is my father's obsession, the capstone to his career. It is Sloan's payday, the event that will turn her executive stock options into 9 figures of liquid wealth. But the IPO has one absolute, non-negotiable requirement: a pristine, clean, unqualified audit from our external auditors. The auditors are, in fact, in the building right now, camped out in a conference room on the 28th floor. They are the audience for this entire performance. The IPO is the single greatest point of leverage. It means any accusation, any hint of financial impropriety, is not just a problem, it is a potential $10 billion catastrophe. This brings me to Pierce Latham, the COO. He's a tall man, impeccably dressed, utterly neutral. He never sides with Sloan in meetings, nor does he side with my father. He is a pure operator. His relationship with Sloan is the most dangerous variable on the board. It is, as my analysts would say, clear but unclear. There is no visible affair. That would be too crude, too simple to detect. Theirs is an alliance of mutual benefit. Sloan, as CFO, approves the capital expenditures that Pierce, as COO, needs for his operational projects. He wants new servers, a new logistics hub in Singapore, an upgraded satellite network for our field agents. Sloan makes the money appear. In return, he provides her with operational cover. She needs a vendor fast-tracked. Pierce's procurement team makes it happen. She needs a pilot program budget. Pierce's managers sign off. He provides the how for her what. Their relationship is a perfectly balanced, silent transaction. My investigation did not begin with a grand conspiracy. It began with a data point, an anomaly in the procurement logs. 6 months ago, the vendor sandbox sprang to life. A new company, Everset Pilot LLC, appeared on the books. It was registered as a logistical testing partner. The pilot contract started small: $50,000 for a feasibility study, $75,000 for a risk assessment matrix. Then, 3 months ago, the numbers spiked. The payments to Everset jumped from 5 figures to 7. $1.2 million is $2.5 million, $3.1 million, all classified as experimental deployment funds. These were enormous sums for an unknown entity. Yet, Everset was not registered in our primary vendor database. It existed only within Sloan's sandbox, approved directly by her office. I ran the name, Everset Pilot LLC. The trail was cold, just as it was designed to be. The company was registered in Delaware, a standard ghost filing, but the service address, the one listed on the wire transfer authorizations, was not a corporate office tower. It was Mailbox 73B at a postal drop service in the Harborway district, a newly gentrified area of residential lofts and expensive coffee shops. I pulled the satellite imagery. The address was a brick-and-glass condominium building, Everset Pilot LLC. Our new multi-million-dollar testing partner was being run from a P.O. box in an empty apartment lobby. This was the structural vulnerability I had warned my father about. This was the invisible payment structure. The final piece of the puzzle came 2 weeks ago. The human element. My department has an open door policy. We also have a digital, anonymous whistleblower portal. I received 2 separate, non-anonymous meeting requests on the same day. One from a junior analyst in procurement, the other from a mid-level manager in accounts payable. They were nervous. The meeting notes were vague. Questions regarding sandbox vendor payments. Urgent. Need to discuss new partner invoicing. They saw it. The analysts saw the astronomical contracts being pushed through for Everset without the standard 40-point verification. The AP manager saw the wire transfers going to a residential mail drop. A glaring red flag. They were good employees. They were scared. They were doing their job and coming to the head of ethics. The first meeting, with the analyst, was scheduled for a Tuesday at 10 a.m. At 9:30 a.m., I received a cancellation email. System error, it read. The issue has been resolved. Apologies for the trouble. The second meeting, with the AP manager, was for Wednesday at 3 p.m. At 2:41 p.m., another cancellation. Met with CFO's office. Misunderstanding on my part. The new protocol is clear now. No meeting needed. A misunderstanding. I pulled the access logs for the 42nd floor. The junior analyst's badge was used to access the executive finance suite at 9:15 a.m. on Tuesday. The AP manager's badge was used at 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday. Both were summoned, one by one, to Sloane's office, and both, immediately after, canceled their confidential meetings with me. They weren't just warned off, they were silenced. This was no longer just financial malpractice. It was active, provable intimidation. I closed my terminal. The map was complete. It wasn't a complex diagram. It was a straight line, a simple, brutal piece of architecture. Sloane, the architect, created the sandbox. She used Everset, the ghost company, as the vehicle to siphon money from the flow fund. But she couldn't sign off on the purpose of the funds. She needed operations to request the tests. That was Pierce. He was the enabler, the logistical arm that provided the why for her payments. He generated the paperwork for the tests that his own teams never ran, which Sloane would then fund, sending millions to a ghost company. Sloane, Everset, Pierce, the money, the vehicle, the justification, a perfect, self-contained triangle, insulated from every audit. Until this morning, until I stood in that lobby, my cheek throbbing, and realized Sloane's panic had just given me the one thing I was missing: causation. She had just, in front of 40 witnesses, physically assaulted the head of risk for whispering the name of her secret fund. She had put her name on the map in bright, red ink. The pain in my cheek was no longer a dull throb. It was a sharp, localized, clinical fact. By 9:05 a.m., I was in my office. The magnetic lock on the door sealed. The bottle of water I held to my face was just a cold press. The real ice was in my veins. Sloane had just assaulted the head of risk. She had declared war. She didn't know I had already mapped the battlefield. My silence for the last 6 months had been methodical. While she was holding my father's hand and running her sandbox, I was running queries. Now, the slap had given me cause for escalation. I was no longer just monitoring. I was executing a full-spectrum forensic audit. I sat at my terminal. The pain in my face was a grounding sensation, a reminder of the physical stakes. I entered my credentials, bypassed the 2-factor authentication with a hard key, and opened my primary tool, the CM. The Security Information and Event Management Console is the central nervous system of QSG. Every login, every file access, every keystroke on a privileged server is logged. It is a tsunami of data, impossible to parse unless you know what to look for. I knew. I isolated all high-privilege access logs for the 42nd floor finance servers. I filtered the time frame, midnight to 5 a.m. A normal night would show automated backup processes, maybe a server patch. At 1:13 a.m., I found it. A login. CFO Assistant Exec. It was a high-level admin account, a ghost key used by Sloane's top-level support staff, ostensibly for system-level financial software updates. It was also the perfect cover for off-hours activity. The account had accessed a single directory: Finance Server 01, Secure Vendor Sandbox Approvals. And it had modified one file, Everset Q3 Pilot Approval 3.1M PDF. $3.1 million, the largest payment to Everset to date. I retrieved the file. It was exactly what I expected. A clean, simple, 3-page PDF. Page 1 was the request from Operations, signed by Pierce Latham, requesting funds for Phase 3 logistical stress testing. Page 2 was the budget. Page 3 was the final authorization, digitally signed by Sloane Archer. It was immaculate, too immaculate. I ran the file through my forensic metadata analyzer. The last modified timestamp was 1:14 a.m., consistent with the access log. But another field caught my eye. PDF producer, Adobe. PDF library, flattened. Flattened. A flattened PDF is a digital corpse. You take a document that has multiple layers, text boxes, form fields, and most importantly, digital comments, and you collapse them all into a single, static surface image. It's a way of finalizing a document. It's also a highly effective way of murdering the evidence, of erasing the digital conversation that happened on the document before it was signed. It was the digital equivalent of burning the rough drafts. Sloane was smart, but she wasn't a risk analyst. QSG, per the compliance standards I wrote, maintains a triple redundant, immutable cold storage archive. Every version of every file processed on a compliance-tagged server is backed up before it can be modified. The system is designed to defeat exactly this kind of evidence tampering. I opened a command line interface to the cold storage vault. Retrieve, Finance Server 01, Secure, Vendor Sandbox Approvals, Everset Q3 Pilot Approval 3.1M, PDF, V1.2, MQ Ethics 9A. My terminal hummed. The archive was deep. It took a full 90 seconds. Then, the file appeared on my desktop. Pre-flatten. I opened it, the same 3 pages, but this time, on page 3, next to Sloane's signature line, there was a small, yellow digital comment box. It had been placed, and then deleted, just before the document was flattened, but the archive had captured it. The author of the comment was CFO Assistant Exec. The timestamp was 1:14 a.m. The comment contained 6 words. Pilot payment, route per S, no email trail. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was the gun, still smoking. Route per S, route per Sloane, no email trail. A direct, explicit, written instruction to commit conspiracy, to bypass our mandatory email retention and discovery protocols. This single comment proved mens rea. It proved intent. Now I had to connect the ghost account to the human. Who was at that terminal at 1:13 a.m.? I cross-referenced the 1:13 a.m. login with the physical access logs for the 42nd floor. The terminal IP address that modified the file was located in the small, glass-walled conference room adjacent to Sloane's main office. I pulled the high-definition security camera feed for the 42nd floor executive corridor. The feed was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of the server room status lights. I scrubbed to 00:57 a.m. The executive elevator doors slid open. 2 figures emerged, not an assistant, Sloane Archer and Pierce Latham. My pulse quickened. They were in business attire, looking stressed. Sloane was holding her phone, Pierce a leather-bound folio. They walked with purpose. They didn't go to their respective offices. Pierce swiped his access card at the small conference room. The light on the lock clicked green. They both entered, and the door clicked shut. The camera's perspective was the hallway. It couldn't see into the room, but it didn't need to. I watched the timestamp. At 1:18 a.m., the door opened. Sloane and Pierce walked out. They looked tense, but relieved. They walked back to the elevator and were gone. The 1:13 a.m. login, the 1:14 a.m. comment, They happened while Sloan and Pierce were the only two people in that room. They hadn't delegated the dirty work. They had done it themselves. But I needed more. I needed the why. The 42nd floor corridor is a high-security, sensitive information zone. It's equipped with emergency services-grade microphones, designed to capture audio in a crisis. My office has programmatic access to those audio logs for compliance reviews. I pulled the audio file for the corridor, time synced to the video. I scrubbed to 005745, just as they were walking from the elevator. Before the conference room door closed, the audio was thin, layered with the hiss of the HVAC system, but their voices were clear. Sloan. Too much risk in a single transfer. The new audit software will flag the spike. We can't be that crude. Pierce. So we break it up, cut it into pilot streams? Use the new procurement codes I pushed last week? Sloan. Exactly. Multiple, smaller streams. Run them on a 9-day cycle. Keep it under the 10-day audit threshold. My blood went cold. The 10-day threshold. I opened the finance ledger again. Sloan, as CFO, had helped design our third-party automated audit software. Our system was programmed to flag any unusual vendor payments over $500,000 or any new vendor who appeared on a standard 10-day bi-weekly payment cycle. She had designed the loophole, and now she was exploiting it. I pulled the full transaction history for Everset: $250,000 on October 1st, $410,000 on October 10th, $320,000 on October 19th, $290,000 on October 28th. A perfect 9-day cycle, always under the $500,000 automated flag. It was a programmatic bleed, meticulously designed to be invisible to the very system she was supposed to be guarding. Now, the final piece. Who was Everset Pilot LLC? I already knew the address was a mail drop in a Harborway residential building. I needed the incorporation papers. My department has a Level 5 subscription to the Delaware Secretary of State database. I wasn't just searching. I was pulling the original scanned filing packet. The file downloaded. Certificate of Incorporation. Everset Pilot, LLC. The registered agent was a generic Wilmington firm. Standard. But the filer, the name of the entity that submitted the paperwork and paid the $150 filing fee, it wasn't a law firm, it was a trust. Archer Trust Services. Archer. Sloan's maiden name. I stared at the screen. It was arrogant. It was astonishingly lazy. She was so insulated by her power, so confident in her digital fortress, that she had used her own family name, her maiden name, to register the shell company she was using to embezzle millions. She was hiding in plain sight. I had it, the late-night login, the flattened PDF, the hidden comment demanding no email trail, the video of her and Pierce entering the room, the audio of them planning the conspiracy, pilot streams, 9-day cycle, the corporate filing linking the shell company to Archer Trust Services. And now, the 8:52 a.m. video from the lobby, the assault, the motive, the panic. The case was a closed, hermetically sealed loop. I began my final protocol. First, I compiled every piece of evidence: the video files, the audio logs, the original PDF, the metadata report, the cold storage retrieval logs, the Delaware filing, and the 4K video of the slap. I bundled them into a 2.4 gigabyte, AES 256 encrypted 7-zip file. I named it QSG Ethics 9A Hold.7Z. I uploaded this file to the secure, quarantined server partition shared only by the 3 independent members of the board of directors. I did not send them the password. I simply triggered an automated notification from the system. A Level 1 Ethics Hold file has been deposited by the head of risk for your review. A decryption key will be delivered at a time of escalating concern. They now knew a bomb was in the vault. They just didn't know how big it was. Second, I set the stage. I needed Sloan, Pierce, my father, and the rest of senior management in one room, a room I controlled. I opened the corporate scheduling system and created a new, high-priority, mandatory attendance meeting. Subject: Town Hall, a review of corporate culture and integrity. Time, 4:00 p.m. Today, location, the Northbridge Auditorium. It was the perfect cover. As the head of ethics, calling an emergency culture review after a public, violent altercation in the lobby was not just plausible. It was my job. It was a meeting Sloan and Pierce would be forced to attend, to show leadership, to control the narrative. If they didn't, they would look guilty. If they did, they would be walking directly into my kill box. My 6-month, silent, digital investigation was complete. All I had needed was a single, human catalyst to set the final pieces in motion. This morning, by the glass elevators, I provided that catalyst. My whisper to my father, "I heard something you need to know about Sloan and the Flow Fund," wasn't a daughter's plea. It was a penetration test. I was deliberately probing the system's defenses. I wasn't trying to warn my father. I was trying to trigger Sloan. And she had, in her blind arrogance, failed the test. She defaulted to a crude, physical attack. She gave me the linchpin. The digital footprint was the how. The slap, recorded in 4K, was the why. I looked at my desktop clock. 9:45 a.m. The invitations were out. The evidence was secured. The auditorium was booked. The trap was set. By 2:00 p.m., the 42nd floor Legacy boardroom was filled with the heavy, anxious silence of senior executives who know there is blood in the water. This wasn't the 4:00 p.m. all-staff culture review I had scheduled. This was the preliminary. This was the ambush I'd laid for the ambush. After my mandatory attendance invite for the 4 p.m., Town Hall went out. Sloane's office had called mine within 3 minutes. She didn't call herself. She had her assistant do it. "Ms. Archer would like to understand the agenda for the 4:00 p.m. meeting. She feels it's prudent for the senior leadership team to align on messaging first. Can you all meet at 2:00 p.m.? "Of course," I had replied. "I'm happy to facilitate. In fact, I have some materials on procedural integrity I'd love to review with the team." She had walked right into it. She thought this 2:00 p.m. meeting was her idea, her chance to control the narrative, to frame the unfortunate incident in the lobby, to get all her department heads in a room and remind them who was in charge before I could address the entire company. She thought she was setting the agenda. She didn't realize she was the agenda. I was the last to arrive. I walked in carrying nothing but a standard-issue company tablet. The room was packed. 20 department heads, legal, HR, procurement, operations, all seated around the massive, polished mahogany table. My father sat at the head, looking haggard, his eyes red-rimmed. Sloan was on his right, Pierce on his left, the unholy trinity, projecting a forced, united front. Sloan was in complete control. Her performance was flawless. The red handprint on my cheek had faded to a dull, purplish bruise, but I wore no makeup to cover it. I let it sit there, a silent accusation in the middle of the room. Sloan, pointedly, never looked at it. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Sloan began, taking charge before I even sat down. Her voice was smooth, confident, the voice of the CFO. "Mara has, in her role, scheduled a company-wide town hall for 4:00 p.m. to discuss culture. Before that, I felt it was vital we, as leaders, align on our key messaging, especially around our new efficiency initiatives, which are, as you know, critical to the IPO." She was already spinning. She was framing culture as efficiency, a corporate buzzword. She was dismissing my 4:00 p.m. meeting as a fluff piece. "And," she continued, her voice softening, "I know what you all saw this morning, or what you heard. It was an unfortunate family moment. Mara and I had a misunderstanding. It was unprofessional, and I have apologized." A crisp, corporate lie. She hadn't spoken a word to me. "So," she smiled, a tight, brilliant smile, "to ensure we are all on the same page regarding our financial culture of transparency and efficiency, I'd like to briefly present the Q3 results of the Vendor Sandbox initiative, to show you all just how secure and effective our new cash flow streams are." She was magnificent. She was using her own fraud mechanism as proof of her transparency. This was her preemptive strike. She motioned to the main screen. "If you'll assist me, Mara." She was handing me the rope. "Of course, Sloane," I said. My voice was quiet, respectful. I linked my tablet to the main display. "We have your presentation queued." I clicked the file. It bloomed across the 12-foot screen. It was beautiful. The QSG logo, crisp white on a deep blue background. The title, The Sandbox Initiative, Securing the Future. Sloane stood up and walked to the screen. For 20 minutes, she gave a masterclass. She spoke of risk mitigation, of supply chain integrity. She showed graph after graph, all with smooth, upward trending curves, perfect fonts, precise data points. She explained how the sandbox allowed QSG to test new vendors, protecting the company from fraud. The department heads were nodding. My father looked visibly relieved. She was the expert, the golden hand, turning a moment of violent chaos into a lecture on fiscal prudence. She was selling them the lie, and they were buying it. "As you can see," she concluded, pointing to a final, triumphant pie chart. "The sandbox has stress-tested 47 new vendors this quarter alone, processing over $22 million in pilot funds, all while maintaining a 100% compliance record. It is the very model of transparency." She smiled at me. "Any questions?" The room was silent. This was the moment. I kept my voice soft, deferential. "Just one, Sloane. It's a simple process question for my own compliance files." "Of course, Mara." She was indulgent, a teacher speaking to a slow student. "The spending on Everset Pilot LLC was the largest in the program," I said, my eyes on my tablet. "I'm just confirming our due diligence file is complete. Can you confirm that Everset underwent the standard related party interest check?" The air in the room changed. It wasn't a gasp. It was the sudden, collective intake of breath. The department heads, all of whom lived and died by compliance paperwork, knew exactly what that question meant. It was not a process question. It was an accusation, wrapped in bureaucratic language. Pierce Latham, who had been perfectly still, adjusted his tie, a single, sharp movement. Sloane's smile didn't waver, not by a millimeter. She was too good for that. "But of course, Mara, naturally, all of our sandbox partners, especially our largest, are put through the most rigorous conflict of interest screening. It's all in the final approval packet." "Wonderful," I said. "Would you mind showing us? It would be a great example for the team of our culture of transparency in action." This was the pivot. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. She had expected the question. She had not expected the follow-up. She had her flattened PDF, the one with no comments. "I don't think that's necessary. Mara, we have a lot to get through before 4:00 p.m. We can review my files later, in your office." "It will only take a second," I said, still smiling. "I actually have the file right here, from the public finance drive." Before she could object, I clicked. On the main screen, her beautiful pie chart vanished, replaced by the PDF file, Everset Q3 Pilot Approval 3.1M, PDF. I scrolled to the attachments. "Here we are," I said. "Appendix C, Related Party and Conflict of Interest Disclosure." I clicked the file link. The screen flickered and then displayed a single, massive, white page. It was blank. "Oh," I said, my voice filled with polite confusion. "That's strange. It seems to be empty." Sloane laughed. It was a brittle, sharp sound. "A technical glitch. Clearly, the IT department is constantly moving servers. As I said, the file is complete." "You're right," I said. "It must be a glitch. This is just the as-filed version from the active server. As head of risk, I, of course, have access to the immutable compliance archive. The cold storage version, the one our auditors use, it's protocol. You see, let me just pull that one. It should be identical." Sloane took a step toward me. "Mara, that is not necessary." Her voice was no longer smooth. It was a blade. "For a compliance review? I'm afraid it is, I said. I typed a single command string into my tablet. Retrieve, Finance Server 01, Secure Vendor Sandbox Approvals, Everset Q3 Pilot Approval 3.1M, PDF, V1.2, Youth MQ, Ethics, 9A. The screen went blue. A retrieving from cold storage. Progress bar appeared. The room was so quiet, I could hear the whir of the HVAC system's ceiling fan. It was the only sound. Whir, whir, whir. Sloane stood frozen, her back to the department heads, her face a mask of controlled fury, watching the progress bar. Pierce Latham was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. The bar hit 100%. The PDF reappeared. It looked identical. Ah, here we go, I said. Let's try that appendix again. I scrolled down. Appendix C, Related Party and Conflict of Interest Disclosure. I clicked the link. This time, the file was not blank. It was a one-page scan of a Delaware incorporation filing. I zoomed in. The name Archer Trust Services filled the 12-foot screen, the name of the entity that had filed the paperwork for Everset Pilot LLC. Archer. I then highlighted the date of filing on the document, March 12th, and I highlighted the date of execution on Sloane's primary signature page, March 12th. The same day, I said, my voice just a clinical observation. How efficient. The sound of the fan was deafening. The department heads were staring, their faces pale. The head of procurement looked like he was going to be sick. The head of legal, Garrett, was staring at me, his expression unreadable, a mixture of horror and, I thought, admiration. Sloane turned. She walked slowly from the screen until she was standing directly in front of me. Her face was white. The mask was gone. You, she whispered, her voice shaking with a rage that made the slap in the lobby seem like a love tap. You are trying to smear me. You are smearing your stepmother, in front of my team. I didn't stand. I looked up at her, my voice clear, cold, and carrying to every corner of the room. It was no longer a daughter. It was no longer a victim. It was the head of ethics and risk. I am not your daughter. You are not my mother. You are the chief financial officer of a soon-to-be public company, and I am the head of risk. I am not smearing you. I am protecting our future shareholders from an undisclosed multi-million-dollar conflict of interest. Daniel! Sloane shrieked, wheeling on my father. Are you going to let her do this? Are you going to let your daughter destroy this family? Destroy this company? My father rose from his chair, his hands shaking, his face ashen. Mara, Sloane, please, this is a misunderstanding. We can solve this. This is not the forum. He was trying to shut it down, to put the explosion back in the box. I raised my hand, not to him, to the room. Please maintain order, I said, my voice cutting through his. This is not a family meeting. This is a formal compliance review, and it is not over. Sit down, Dad, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his panic, and he froze. I turned my gaze from him to Garrett Cole, our general counsel, who was sitting at the far end of the table, his face the color of old parchment. Garrett, I said, my voice cold and procedural. Please note the time. It is 2:41 p.m., Eastern Standard Time, as per the Quinn Stratagem Group Corporate Bylaws, Section 9, Subsection A. I am formally invoking an ethics trigger review. The entire room, already frozen, seemed to fall into a vacuum. An ethics trigger review had never been invoked in the company's 30-year history. It was a kill switch, a constitutional failsafe I had helped write into the charter 2 years ago. Sloane snapped her head toward me. You have no authority to— I have the sole authority, I countered, not looking at her. I was speaking to Garrett, and by extension, the entire legal framework of the company. The bylaw states, and I quote, "The head of ethics and risk may, upon the discovery of credible material evidence of executive malfeasance or gross financial impropriety, immediately convene an emergency session of the Board of Directors and its attendant committees. the undisclosed related party entity, Archer Trust Services, documented on that screen, qualifies as credible material evidence. I looked at my father. As chairman of the board, you are now in an emergency session. I looked at Sloan. As a board member and CFO, you are the subject of this review. I looked at the stunned department heads. And as senior officers, you are all material witnesses. No one leaves this room. I nodded to the sterile white Polycom speaker in the center of the table. Garrett, please dial in the 3 independent directors, now. Garrett's hands were shaking, but he was a lawyer above all. He entered the code, the room filled with the beep, boop, beep of the dialing, each tone an executioner's footstep. The line connected. This is General Reynolds. This is unscheduled. What is it? General Reynolds, Commissioner Davies, Dean Anand, Garrett said, his voice strained. This is Garrett Cole. I am in the Legacy boardroom with the full senior management team. Mara Quinn has, at 1441, formally invoked Section 9A. We are in an emergency session. There was a sharp intake of breath on the line. It was Commissioner Davies, the former SEC enforcement chief. On what grounds, Ms. Quinn? I leaned toward the speaker. Good afternoon. Directors, the grounds are a multi-million-dollar, undisclosed conflict of interest and evidence of active conspiracy to defraud the company, executed by the Chief Financial Officer, Sloan Archer, and the Chief Operating Officer, Pierce Latham. I let that hang in the air. Pierce, who had been a statue of neutral competence, flinched as if he'd been shot. He looked at Sloan, his eyes wide with betrayal. He hadn't realized he was on the agenda. A single, perfect bead of sweat broke from his hairline and began a slow, agonizing descent down his left temple. Ms. Archer, Mr. Latham, Commissioner Davies' voice was suddenly steel, all warmth gone. You are on the record. A direct question to you both. Are you, or have you ever been, involved in any undisclosed financial entity that does, or has done, business with Quinn Stratagem Group? This was the legal guillotine. A yes was a confession. A no was perjury, and a separate federal crime. Sloan, to her credit, was a magnificent fighter. She actually laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound, a shard of glass. This is a theater of the absurd, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. A gotcha moment staged by my own disgruntled stepdaughter. Archer Trust Services is a dormant family entity. Created decades ago, it costs $5,000 to legally dissolve a trust. So it sits on the books. Its name was likely used by a third-party filing agent in Wilmington as a clerical error, a typo. She spread her hands wide, a gesture of supreme confidence. This is a non-event. It's a simple paperwork mistake, one I am happy to correct. Mara has, in her enthusiasm, blown a typo into a federal case. A clerical error, I repeated, my voice flat. A typo. Yes, Sloan snapped. Exactly. Then let's review the other clerical errors, I said. I clicked a button on my tablet. The screen behind Sloan changed. At 1:13 a.m. last Tuesday, I said, the file you just dismissed, Everset, Hue 3, Pilot Approval /3.1M, PDF, was accessed on the FOG 4042nd floor finance server. The access point IP was the terminal in the small conference room adjacent to your office. Sloan. Sloan's face went white. This she had not expected. A typo, I continued. That required late-night access. But of course, that could be an assistant. I clicked again. This is the 4K security footage from the 42nd floor executive corridor. Time-stamped at 12:57 a.m. It shows you, Ms. Archer, and you, Mr. Latham, entering that specific conference room. The door locks. At 1:18 a.m., you are both seen leaving. You were the only 2 occupants of that room during the entire 21-minute window in which the file was accessed, modified, and flattened. Pierce Latham made a small noise, a strangled gasp. He was staring at Sloan, his expression one of dawning, animalistic panic. I also have, I said, my voice dropping. The emergency audio log from that corridor. Per security protocol, the high-sensitivity microphones are active. As you were walking from the elevator, before the door closed, you were recorded. I looked at Pierce. Your voice, Mr. Latham, was captured, suggesting you cut it into pilot streams. And your voice, Ms. Archer, was captured, confirming you would use a 9-day cycle specifically to keep it under the 10-day audit threshold. The room was no longer silent. It was dead. The air had been sucked out. The department heads were staring at their binders, at the wood grain of the table, at anything but the 2 executives I had just vivisected. Sloane was pale, but she was still on her feet. "Circumstantial," she whispered, her voice hoarse. We were running a red team exercise, a hypothetical, stress testing the audit system. That is my job as CFO, to find the weaknesses." It was a brilliant parry, a masterpiece of spin, even at the edge of the abyss. "A red team exercise," I said. "A plausible theory. Unfortunately, it conflicts with this." I clicked my tablet one last time. The screen changed again. It was the V1.2 pre-flatten version of the PDF, the cold storage version, the one before the clerical error. I zoomed in until the small, yellow digital comment box filled the 12-foot screen. Pilot payment. Route per S. No email trail. "This comment," I said, "was added at 1:14 a.m. from inside that room by the CFO assistant exec account. It was then digitally deleted and the file was flattened to hide it. This is not a red team exercise. This is a direct, explicit, written instruction to bypass our email retention protocols and SEC discovery mandates. This is not a typo. This is a confession. This is conspiracy to commit fraud." My God. General Reynolds barked over the speaker. The scraping sound was deafening. Pierce Latham had shoved his chair back, knocking it over. He was on his feet, his face slick with sweat. I have a call," he stammered, fumbling for his phone. "An urgent operational? I need to—" He was walking backward to the door, a man fleeing a burning building. "Stay seated, Mr. Latham," I commanded. He ignored me. His hand was on the brass doorknob. "Marcus," I said, my voice calm. I spoke into the air. My in-earpiece, connected to the 42nd floor security desk, was live. "Mr. Latham is not permitted to leave the executive wing. Escort him to the 40th floor holding room. Take his phone, now." The main boardroom door opened so fast it startled him. 2 uniformed security officers stepped inside. They were large men. They didn't look at me, or Sloane, or my father. They looked only at Pierce. "Mr. Latham," the first guard said. It was not a request. Pierce froze. He looked at his phone. He looked at the guards. He knew logistics. He knew procedure. He knew what a hold meant. He looked at Sloane. One last, pleading, terrified look. She wouldn't meet his gaze. Slowly, he placed his mobile phone on the mahogany table. "Fine," he whispered. He turned and walked out between the 2 guards. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, the sound of a vault closing. One down. Every eye in the room, including the stunned department heads, turned to Sloane. She was alone. My father, who had been watching this entire exchange as if it were a play he couldn't understand, finally turned to his wife. His face was gray, collapsed, a mask of profound, agonizing disbelief. His voice was a dry rasp. "Sloane?" It was the last word of his old life. It was a plea. He was begging her, begging, for the clerical error explanation, for the red team theory, for anything but the truth that was now consuming the room. Sloane looked at him. Her face was a marble mask. The anger was gone. The panic was gone. There was only a cold, reptilian emptiness. She saw, in that single, broken word, that he was no longer her husband, her defender, or her partner. He was just a casualty. She turned away from him. She stared at her own name on the screen. She said nothing. Her silence was the final, Brutal confession. It was the sound of my father's world, his trust, and his IPO dreams shattering into a million pieces. He made a small, choking sound and sank back into his chair, his hand over his mouth. A man hollowed out. Commissioner Davies's voice was sharp, a scalpel. "Thank you, Ms. Quinn. I believe the board has sufficient cause. I call for a vote of the board of directors, emergency session, to place Ms. Sloan Archer on immediate, unpaid administrative leave pending a full, independent forensic investigation, and to cede all CFO duties to the comptroller, effective immediately." Seconded, General Reynolds barked. "All in favor," Davies commanded. "Aye," said the general. "Aye," said Dean Anand. "Aye," said Davies. There was a terrible, agonizing pause. My father was slumped in his chair, his eyes closed. "Daniel?" Davies asked, her voice, for the first time, softening with pity. My father raised his head. He looked at the empty seat where Pierce had been. He looked at his wife, who stared blankly at the screen. He drew a single, ragged breath. "Aye," he whispered. "The motion passes, 4-0, Davies said. "Ms. Archer is suspended. Miss Quinn, your office will coordinate with our independent counsel. Garrett, you will begin the investigation. We are adjourned." The line clicked dead. I stood up. This was the last part of the procedure. Per QSG protocol for executive suspension during a financial investigation, I am directing corporate security and IT to immediately, I looked at my watch, at 14:52 to seal her office, and to take possession of all company-issued devices, her laptop, her hard drives, and her work-issued mobile phone, effective now. Sloan finally moved. She looked at me. The emptiness was gone, replaced by a cold, pure, concentrated hatred that chilled the air. She slowly, deliberately, began to pack her alligator skin portfolio. She was calm. She was already shifting. This was no longer a boardroom. It was a war zone, and she was just regrouping. She snapped her laptop shut. With a gesture of profound, theater-filling contempt, she slid it across the polished table toward me. It spun once and came to a stop, perfectly centered in front of my seat. She slung her portfolio over her shoulder. She looked at my father, who wouldn't look up. Then she looked at me. A small, humorless, terrifying smile touched her lips. "You will regret this, Mara," she said, her voice a low, conversational promise. "I will sue this company, I will sue this family, and I will sue you. I will burn this place to the ground, and I will own the ashes." I met her gaze. The bruise on my cheek, a faint purple shadow, throbbed in time with my pulse. "This company," I said, "has a $50 million standing retainer with the litigation department at Alden and Wex. Sloan, we welcome the court's review." At 3:55 p.m., the Northbridge Auditorium was a cavern of tension. It was designed for shareholder meetings and product launches, with seating for 600. Today, it was standing room only. The air was thick with the electric, giddy, terrified hum of mass speculation. The 2:00 p.m. boardroom meeting, the locked 42nd floor, the suspension of the CFO. The news had ripped through the building's internal chat channels like wildfire. The culture review I had scheduled was no longer a boring mandatory meeting. It was the public execution. I was backstage, in the dark, watching them file in. Analysts, managers, HR reps, procurement officers, the entire corporate body, assembled. They were whispering, checking their phones, casting nervous glances at the empty stage. In the front row, I saw him, my father. He hadn't gone to his office. He hadn't gone home. He had come here, as the chairman, to witness the fallout. He sat alone in the reserved row, a man carved from gray stone, his hands gripping the armrests of his seat. And in the third row, off to the side, I saw her. My heart didn't stop. It didn't pound. It just registered the data point. Sloan, she was here. She hadn't been escorted from the building. She had only been suspended from her duties. She was still a board member, still a shareholder. She had come to watch me. She had come to show the company she was not afraid, that this was a temporary, pathetic coup by a disgruntled stepdaughter. She was here to gather evidence for the lawsuit she had promised. Her presence was an act of pure, distilled arrogance. She smiled and nodded at a few managers who looked at her in horror. At 4 p.m., I stepped out of the wings. A single, harsh, white spotlight found me. It was the only light in the room. The hundreds of whispering voices died in an instant. There was a single, collective intake of breath, and then silence. I walked to the simple black podium at the center of the stage. Behind me, the 40-foot projector screen was dark. I looked out, my eyes scanning the sea of pale, upturned faces. I let the silence stretch, letting it become heavy, unbearable. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice, amplified by the PA system, was calm, clear, and cold. It filled every corner of the vast room. "Thank you for coming. I am Mara Quinn, head of Ethics and Risk. We are here today to conduct a review of our corporate culture." I let that hang. I saw Sloane, in the third row, smirk. She thought this was it, a boring speech. "Culture," I continued, "is not the list of values we hang on the lobby walls. Culture is what we tolerate. Culture is what happens in the hallways when we think no one is watching." I looked up at the tech booth at the back of the hall. I nodded. Once. "This morning," I said, "an incident occurred at 8:52 a.m. The 40-foot screen behind me flickered to life. It was not a PowerPoint slide. It was the high-definition, 4K video from Dome Camera 4A. The angle was high, looking down on the executive turnstiles. The room, already silent, became a vacuum. On the screen, they saw us. Daniel Quinn, Sloane Archer, and me. We were tiny figures in a vast marble hall. The audio was on. The ambient noise of the lobby, the tickers, the quiet chatter, filled the auditorium. And then they saw it. They saw my mouth move, a whisper to my father. They saw Sloane's hand seize my wrist. They saw her face, twisted in a mask of pure fury. And then, the sound. The crack of the slap was so loud on the PA system that it sounded like a gunshot. It was a physical, violent explosion of sound. A single, unified gasp came from the 600 people in the room. It was a wave of shock, a sound of horror. People in the front rows physically recoiled. I saw my father flinch, as if he'd been struck himself. On the screen, the video froze, locking on the moment of impact. My head snapped to the side, my hair flying. A roar of whispers erupted. "Is that... Oh my God. She hit her. In the lobby." I let the whispers build for a count of 5. Then I spoke again, my voice cutting through the noise like ice. "This incident," I said, "was not a family misunderstanding. It was the direct result of a single compliance question." I nodded to the booth again. The video of the slap vanished. It was replaced by a new image, a clean white document, a PDF, and a single yellow comment box, blown up to the size of a car. Pilot payment, route per S, no email trail. The whispers died instantly. This, they understood. This was not a family drama. This was a financial crime. The word conspiracy didn't need to be said. It was right there, in 72-point font. "This is an instruction from the CFO's office to commit fraud," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "To create an unaudited slush fund and to actively bypass SEC and legal discovery protocols. The Board of Directors has reviewed this evidence, along with the incorporation papers for Archer Trust Services, as of 2:52 p.m. today. Sloane Archer has been suspended from all duties as Chief Financial Officer, pending a full forensic investigation." The room was dead. Not one person moved. "We are here," I said, my voice rising, "to discuss integrity, and I will make this clear. Violence and deceit have no place at Quinn Stratagem Group." "You lie!" The shriek came from the third row. It was primal. Sloane was on her feet. her face a mask of unbelievable rage. This public humiliation, this cold, procedural dismantling in front of her employees was more than she could bear. "You are lying, you biased, vindictive." She broke from the row. She was rushing the aisle, scrambling, trying to get to the low stage. She wasn't running at me. She was running for the podium, for the microphone, to tell her side, to regain control. "She's a liar. She fabricated all of it." Two uniformed security officers, the same men who had escorted Pierce, materialized from the side aisle. I had, of course, stationed them there. They didn't know why until this exact second. They intercepted her at the foot of the stairs. "Ma'am, you need to—" "Get your hands off me!" she screamed. She fought them, clawing at the jacket of one guard, a wild, cornered animal. It was a grotesque, horrifying spectacle. The CFO, screaming and fighting with security in the aisle of the company auditorium. I looked past her. I looked at my father. He was gripping the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. He was watching, his face ashen, as his wife, the golden hand of his company, the woman he loved, was physically restrained and dragged, shouting, from the room. He was watching his entire world, his judgment, his love, his legacy, be exposed as a catastrophic failure. The heavy auditorium doors slammed shut, cutting off Sloane's final shriek. The silence that returned was thick, broken. 600 people were staring at me, their faces a mixture of terror and, for the first time, a dawning, hesitant respect. I didn't acknowledge what had just happened. I simply turned back to the microphone, as if I had been interrupted by a brief technical difficulty. "As I was saying," I continued, my voice perfectly level, "the culture of shadows is over, effective immediately. The vendor sandbox program is frozen, pending a full audit. When, and if, it is reinstated, it will be under a new charter, and that charter will have one unbreakable rule. Every contract, of any value, processed through any special fund, will publicly disclose its ultimate beneficial owner. No exceptions, no blind trusts, no shell companies." I paused. No email trails. For a second, nothing. The room was still processing the trauma of Sloane's exit. Then, from the back, in the cheap seats, a sound. A single person clapping. I saw him. It was the junior analyst from procurement, the one who had scheduled a meeting with me and been forced to cancel. He was on his feet, clapping, his face a mask of defiant relief. Then another clap, the manager from accounts payable. She was standing, too. Then a section head, then the entire legal department, led by Garrett, who was nodding at me, a look of profound, exhausted respect on his face. Within 10 seconds, the entire room was on its feet. The sound was a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was a deafening, percussive, emotional explosion. It was the sound of 600 people who had been working in fear, who had seen the Archer Trust services and been told to look away. It was the sound of 600 people realizing the rules, the real rules, were back. They were not clapping for me, the boss's daughter. They were clapping for the rule. They were clapping because they finally saw themselves in the bylaws. I let the applause wash over the stage for a full minute. I let it build. And I looked at the internal security camera at the back of the auditorium. Its red light was blinking. This, I thought, this is the culture. This is the proof of life. The applause slowly died down. The employees, still standing, looked at me, waiting. I stepped away from the podium. I walked to the edge of the stage, my heels clicking, until I was standing almost directly above my father. He was the only one still sitting. The front row was an island of empty chairs, with him at its center. He looked up at me. His face was a ruin. I spoke, my voice still amplified by the mic, a public statement that was also an intensely private one. "Dad," I said, "I told you what I heard this morning because I respect you. I respect what my mother built with you. I told you because I had to." He stared at me, his eyes shining with a terrible, clear moisture. He couldn't speak. His throat worked. He just nodded. A single, slow, agonizing affirmation. Then he mouthed 2 words, a confession, a surrender, an apology. "I'm sorry." I held his gaze. I gave him a single, sharp nod. It was acceptance. It was not forgiveness, not yet. I turned back to the audience. "This meeting is adjourned." It was not the auditorium. It was 9:00 a.m. the next morning, back in the sterile, silent confines of the Legacy boardroom. The battlefield had been cleared, the blood mopped up, the employees sent back to their desks with a story that would fuel gossip for a decade. Yesterday was the war. Today was the execution. It was just the board, my father, looking 10 years older, and the 3 independent directors, patched in via secure teleconference, their faces grim on the 4K screens. Garrett, our general counsel, sat at the end of the table, his binder of termination paperwork open. And then they were brought in. Sloan and Pierce, they were not in their power suits. Sloan wore dark, expensive slacks and a silk blouse. Her hair was down. She looked exhausted, but the hatred in her eyes was a polished, solid thing. Beside her was not a QSG lawyer, but a man I recognized, Jonas Wexler, from Alden and Wex, the most brutal corporate litigator in Grayford. So she wasn't using our lawyers. She was using my mother's lawyers, a bitter, brilliant irony. "Before we proceed," Jonas Wexler said, his voice smooth as oil, "my client, Ms. Archer, contests the grounds for her suspension. The evidence presented yesterday by Ms. Quinn was circumstantial, taken out of context, and presented in a theatrical, prejudicial manner, constituting libel per se. The clerical error with Archer Trust Services is just that. The audio log is inadmissible. The digital comment is anonymous. We will be filing for wrongful termination, defamation, and seeking damages that will cripple your IPO." Sloan was smiling, a small, cold smile. This was her counterattack. She believed the root per S comment was my only weapon. She believed it was her word against a disgruntled stepdaughter's digital ghost. "Thank you, Mr. Wexler," I said. "I appreciate you framing the stakes. It shows you haven't been fully briefed by your client. You are correct that the root per S comment, while damning, is only the trigger. It was enough for suspension, but for termination, for that, we need to discuss motive." I looked at the independent directors. What I am about to present was held back from yesterday's meetings. I did not believe it was appropriate for the public nature of the town hall. It is the final card, the one I was holding. I clicked my tablet. "This," I said, "is a codicil to the last will and testament of Elizabeth Quinn, my mother." Jonas Wexler's smile faltered. He was a senior partner at Alden and Wex. He knew exactly what this was. "It was executed 1 month before her death and filed with your firm, Mr. Wexler. It establishes her controlling stake in QSG, held in trust for me, with a specific, unusual covenant." Sloan scoffed, a real, audible, contemptuous laugh. "A will? From her? It's meaningless. Mara, Daniel and I were married 5 years ago. Subsequent marriage invalidates any prior spousal provisions. It's legal 101. Your mother's dusty old papers are irrelevant." "You're right, Sloan," I said. "The spousal provisions are invalid, but this isn't about the money, it's about the ethics." I put the text on the main screen. The legal language was dense, but I highlighted the key phrase. "And in the event of a potential public offering, float, or sale of Quinn Stratagem Group, my daughter, Mara Elizabeth Quinn, is hereby granted a moral veto. This right, separate from her equity share, grants her the singular authority to halt any such transaction if, in her sole judgment, the action is predicated on unethical, immoral, or fraudulent grounds." "It's an ethics clause," I said, looking at the directors. "A poison pill. My mother knew my father's ambition. She wanted to ensure he never, ever sacrificed the company's integrity for the IPO. It gives me the personal, unilateral power to kill the Armitage Exchange listing, stone dead, today." Jonas Wexler was silent. He knew the clause was ironclad. He had probably helped write it. My father was staring at the screen, his face a mask of awe. He had forgotten. Sloane's face was white. You would do that? You would destroy your own company, your father's legacy, just to get me? That's the difference between you and me. Sloane, I said, you think this is about getting you? This is about protecting the company. I will kill the IPO to save QSG from fraud. Your lawsuit is meaningless. If you sue, I pull the plug. You get nothing. The company you're trying to sue for damages will have its valuation cut in half. You have no leverage. You have no payday. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had been threatening us with a grenade, not realizing I was holding the detonator for a nuclear bomb. So, I continued, your lawsuit is dead. Now, let's talk about why you're being fired. The root per S comment was the how. This is the why. I clicked again. The screen changed to a new file, a wire transfer log. This is the outbound ledger for Everset Pilot LLC. We have tracked the funds. They did not. As you claimed, go to test vendors. They were consolidated and via 2 shell transfers, routed to a single holding account. I clicked again. A new document, a lease agreement. The holding account was used for one purpose, to pay the long-term, 3-year lease on this property, Harborway Lofts, Unit 9C. The boardroom, this small, suffocating boardroom, was now utterly silent. I could hear Commissioner Davies breathing on the speaker. The Harborway District, I continued, the same district as the P.O. Box for Everset, Unit 9C, a 4,000-square-foot penthouse. The lease was signed 3 months ago, the same week the payments to Everset spiked into the millions. Sloane was staring at the screen, her mask cracking, a deep, primal fear replacing the anger. It's just an apartment. Mara, she whispered. An investment. A corporate apartment for visiting executives. A corporate apartment, I said. Interesting. Then I suppose the corporation also paid for these. I clicked. A new file. Invoices. Crate and Barrel. Design within reach. A $40,000 custom bed. An $18,000 sofa. A $22,000 media center. All billed to the holding company. All delivered to Unit 9C. And all of them, every single invoice, bore the authorized signature for delivery of one person. I zoomed in on the signature, a sharp, clear, arrogant scrawl. Pierce Latham. Garrett Cole, the lawyer, made a small sound. My father just closed his eyes. I looked at Sloane. You weren't just embezzling. Sloane, you were nesting. You weren't stress-testing vendors. You were buying furniture. I looked at my father. His eyes were still closed, but I spoke to him anyway. Dad, I said, my voice softening. This morning, in the lobby, the whisper I told you, the thing I heard. I clicked my tablet. The auditorium fell silent, but this was a different, sicker silence. It was the audio file from the 42nd floor corridor, the 12:57 a.m. recording. I didn't play the part about the 9-day cycle. I played the part that came after. The audio was clear. Sloane's voice, giddy, triumphant, quiet. It's done. The 3.1 is moving. The final payment for the build-out. It's really happening. Pierce, and Pierce's voice, low, intimate. Just one more quarter. We'll have enough to set the foundation. We can walk away from all of this. Just us. Sloane. A new life. God. Just to be free of it. Free of him. My father's head slumped. He didn't make a sound. He just collapsed in on himself. A building whose foundation had been vaporized. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in a silent, terrible grief. He had lost his company, his wife, and his dignity, all in the space of one audio file. I stopped the playback. Sloane was staring at my father, her face a mask of pure, reptilian hatred. Hatred for his weakness, for his grief, for being the man she had to deceive. Pierce, I had forgotten he was even there. He was gone. He was a ghost, staring at the signature on the screen, a man who had just seen his entire life, his career, his affair, and his freedom evaporate. You made this up, Sloane hissed at me, her voice a strangled whisper. You're lying. You made it up. It was a nonsensical denial, a reflex. I didn't need to answer. I just looked at the three faces of the independent directors on the screens. They were appalled. Commissioner Davies looked physically ill. General Reynolds' voice was a low growl. You did this? For this? You stole $22 million. You lied to the board. You corrupted an officer. You were going to gut the company, all to run off with him? There were no more words. The room, the boardroom, understood. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the betrayal, the tawdry, pathetic, greedy betrayal, the money and the love. Commissioner Davies spoke. Her voice was not a scalpel this time. It was a hammer. I call for a final, binding vote of the Board of Directors, a motion to terminate the employment of Sloane Archer, for cause, effective immediately, and to begin legal proceedings to claw back all salary and options. Seconded, General Reynolds barked. Aye, said Davies. Aye, said the General. Aye, said Dean Anand. A long, terrible pause. My father, without looking up, his voice muffled by his hands, said, Aye. The motion passes, 4-0. Ms. Archer is terminated. I move, Davies continued, to terminate the employment of Pierce Latham, for cause, effective immediately, for conspiracy to commit fraud and gross violation of his fiduciary duty. Seconded, Aye. 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 My father just nodded, a single, broken movement. Aye. Mr. Wexler, I said, turning to the high-priced lawyer, who looked like he had just swallowed poison. Security will escort your client and Mr. Latham from the building. I trust you will advise Ms. Archer that her lawsuit is ill-advised, and that my moral veto remains active until the IPO is complete. If she makes one sound, I will kill the listing. She will leave with nothing. Sloane stood up. She looked at my father, still slumped in his chair. She looked at me, the author of her destruction, and she looked at Pierce, the man she had destroyed herself for, who was now just a pale, sweating, empty suit. She said nothing. She had spent all her words, all her lies. She simply turned, and with a horrifying blank dignity, she walked out of the room, her lawyer and her lover trailing silently behind her. The boardroom door clicked shut, a heavy final sound that sealed the tomb. Jonas Wexler, Sloane, and Pierce were gone. In the vacuum of their departure, the only sound was the ragged, wet, utterly broken sound of my father, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in a silent, violent grief. The three independent directors, their faces projected onto the wall, watched this collapse with a grim, funereal pity. The assembled department heads, legal, procurement, HR, the senior VPs who had been forced to witness the entire execution, were pale, frozen, looking anywhere but at the ruined man at the head of the table. This was the moment of greatest danger, a power vacuum, a kingdom without a ruler, its king weeping, its queen banished. This was the moment that empires either shattered or were remade. I did not go to my father. I did not offer comfort. This was not a moment for a daughter. It was a moment for the head of risk. I turned back to the podium, my movements deliberate, precise, surgical. My tablet was cool in my hands. I tapped the screen, closing the encrypted evidence file. The audio log of Sloane's betrayal vanished, and in its place, I projected a new document. It was not a dense, 40-page legal treatise. It was a single page. The font was 40-point, stark and black. I had written it at 4:00 a.m. It was not a policy. It was a commandment. It read, The Quinn Stratagem Group, Charter of Integrity. 1. Total transparency. All contracts, funds, pilots, or sandboxes of any value will publicly disclose their ultimate beneficial owner, UBO, in a manner accessible to the audit committee. The era of shell companies and blind trusts is over. 2. No shadow ledgers. The creation of any special financial vehicle outside of the primary, audited treasury requires a unanimous, recorded vote of the board of directors. 3. The duty to report. Any employee, at any level, who is pressured, advised, or instructed to bypass established protocol, financial or verbal, is mandated to report it directly to the head of ethics. Failure to report is a terminable offense. 4. The consequence of pressure. Any executive, manager, or officer who engages in such pressure or retaliates against a reporter will be terminated for cause, with full forfeiture of all vested and unvested equity. 5. Integrity is our only asset. The room was dead silent. The only sound the whir of the projector. I turned to my father. He was a wreck, a man hollowed out. "Dad," I said. He didn't respond. "Daniel," his head flinched, but he didn't look up. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice cold, devoid of all sympathy. "We are in a crisis of leadership. The company requires order. We require your signature." Slowly, painfully, he raised his head. His face was a ruin. His eyes, red-rimmed and empty, looked at the screen. He saw the words, but I don't think he processed them. He just understood that an action was required. I took the tablet from the podium and placed it on the polished mahogany in front of him. I held out the digital stylus. "You sign first," I commanded. His hand reached for the stylus. It was shaking violently. A tremor that started in his shoulder and vibrated down to his fingertips. He looked at the signature line on the screen. He tried to sign. The digital ink was a jagged, palsied-looking scrawl, a seismograph of his broken heart. He cursed, a low, choked sound, and his other hand stabbed the clear button. He took a breath, a single, ragged, shuddering intake of air. He planted his left hand flat on the table, as if to ground himself. He picked up the stylus again. His hand still trembled, but he forced it, digging the plastic tip into the glass. The line was slow, halting, but it was straight. "Daniel Quinn, Chairman." The signature was complete. It was an act of pure, agonizing will. He dropped the stylus as if it were a hot coal and slumped back, spent. He slid the tablet across the table to me. The heavy black device glided over the polished wood, stopping perfectly in front of my chair. I picked up the stylus. My hand, I noted with a distant, clinical detachment, was perfectly steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. I signed my name below his, Mara E. Quinn. And then I added a second line, my legal right, my mother's final gift, head of ethics and risk, moral veto executor. I was not just signing as an officer of the company, I was signing as the ultimate failsafe, the woman who, per the codicil, held the kill switch for the IPO. My signature was not an act of loyalty, it was a warning. It was a promise that I was the new foundation. I put the stylus down. "It is done." I stood and looked at the terrified department heads still frozen in their seats. Garrett Cole, the lawyer, the head of procurement, who had been unknowingly funding the affair, the head of HR, who had been fielding panicked whispers for months. "I know," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "that some of you were placed in an impossible position. The Sloan-Latham protocol was one of intimidation. You were told to approve things that didn't make sense. You were told to look away. You were told it was above your pay grade." I pointed to the third rule on the screen. "This is the duty to report. It is now the highest law of this company, and it comes with a 14-day amnesty." A flicker of life in their eyes, not just fear, hope. "You have 2 weeks," I said. "Starting now. Come to my office. Tell me about every file you were told to just sign, every budget line that made no sense, every meeting that was off the record, the junior analysts who were silenced, the AP managers who were threatened. Bring me everything. After 14 days, The amnesty closes. If you knew, and you choose to stay silent, you are not a victim. You are complicit. You are part of the old, broken system, and you will be purged along with it. It was not just a threat, it was a lifeline. Garrett Cole, the general counsel, was the first to stand. He was a lawyer, and he understood the shift in power. He adjusted his suit jacket. A sound, necessary policy, Mara. He walked to the table, picked up the stylus, and added his signature below mine. Garrett Cole, general counsel, a public, binding act of allegiance. The head of procurement was next. He stood up, his face still pale, but his eyes were clear. He walked to the table and signed, then HR, then operations. Pierce's terrified second-in-command, one by one. They formed a line. It was not a celebration. It was not a moment of team building. It was a grim, silent, procedural surrender, a baptism under a new, cold God. The overhead lights reflected in the polished wood, glinting off their pale, sweating foreheads. As the last VP signed, my secure phone vibrated, a text message. It was from Marcus, the head of lobby security. "Ma'am, Ms. Archer and Mr. Latham are in the main lobby. They are being escorted out. She has stopped at the front doors, the emergency exit." I walked away from the table, toward the boardroom's massive, floor-to-ceiling glass wall. The room was on the 42nd floor. It overlooked the 4-story main atrium. I looked down. 400 feet below, I saw her, a tiny, perfect, platinum blonde figure. Sloane. She was standing just inside the main glass doors, the same ones we had walked through this morning, in another lifetime. She was clutching her black portfolio bag, the one she'd almost hit me with. Her car, a black Audi, was idling at the curb, but she wasn't moving. She was just standing there, by the emergency exit, a statue of rage. The afternoon crowd of employees streamed past her, a river of humanity flowing around a rock. They were leaving for the day, and as they passed, they pointedly, deliberately, did not look at her. They gave her a wide berth. They pretended she did not exist. She had already been erased. She was a non-person, a ghost in her own lobby. And then, as if she could feel my eyes, she looked up. She tilted her head back, staring up through the 4 stories of glass, past the hanging sculptures, past the tickers, all the way up to the 42nd floor. She found my window. She found me. Our eyes locked across the marble canyon. She was too far away to see my expression. I was too far away to see hers. We were just 2 points of power, one ascendant, one destroyed. I held her gaze. I did not move. I just watched. She held it for a full 10 seconds, a last, silent, hateful duel. Then, she turned, her shoulders rigid. She pushed through the glass door and disappeared into the gray afternoon light. I turned back to the room. I picked up my phone and dialed my head of IT. He answered on the first ring. "Push it," I said. "Ms. Quinn? Push what?" "The charter. File QSG, Charter Amendment 9A, PDF. Force push it to every desktop. Global. Make it the locked wallpaper. No one can log in tomorrow morning until they have clicked acknowledge." "Yes, ma'am. Consider it done." I hung up. I opened my email client. 2. Compliance at Armitage, X. Armitage Exchange IPO Committee. From M. Quinn at quinnstratagem.com. Subject, QSG. Reinforcement of pre-listing control mechanisms. To the committee, be advised that as of 10:00 a.m. today, Quinn Stratagem Group has reinforced its internal financial control mechanisms following an internal audit. The CFO, Sloane Archer, and the COO, Pierce Latham, have been terminated for cause following the discovery of financial impropriety and conspiracy to defraud. The Vendor Sandbox program is suspended. A new, stricter charter of integrity, attached, has been unanimously ratified by the board and signed by all senior officers. These decisive actions strengthen the company's controls and leadership, ensuring a transparent and successful IPO. We look forward to our scheduled meeting. I hit send. The narrative was controlled. The wound was cauterized. The room was finally empty, save for 2 people. The directors had hung up. The managers had fled, clutching their new, signed mandate. It was just me and my father. He was still in his chair, a hollowed-out man, the king in name only. The cost of his ambition, of his blindness, was sitting in the empty chairs of his wife and his COO. I walked over to him. The podium was empty. The battle was over. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I took out a small, folded square of linen. It was old, impossibly soft, and had a single, faded blue E embroidered in the corner. My mother's. I had carried it for 5 years, ever since her funeral. I did not say, "It's going to be okay." I did not say, "We will get through this." I said nothing. I just placed the folded handkerchief on the dark, polished wood in front of him. He stared at it, his hand, the one that had signed the new charter, reached out. He didn't pick it up. He just laid his hand flat on top of it, his fingers gripping the soft fabric, as if he were gripping an anchor in the middle of a storm that had already destroyed him. His shoulders began to shake. A low, terrible, grieving sound came from his chest. I did not comfort him. I did not touch him. There was no victory speech. There was no celebration. There was only the signature and the terrible, echoing cost. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, the hiss of the mechanism sounding exactly like a final surgical sigh. It is 10:00 p.m. The Northbridge Tower lobby is no longer a cathedral of commerce. It is a tomb. The lights are dimmed to a skeletal blue, and the great marble floor, polished to a black mirror, reflects the empty escalators and the dark, sleeping tickers. The only sound is the low, steady whir of a robotic cleaning machine, its single headlight cutting a white cone across the darkness as it buffs away the day's sins. I came down the staff elevator. I did not want the executive lift, not tonight. My heels click, sharp and singular, in the vast, empty space. Each step is an echo. The building, my father's empire, feels hollowed out, just like him. I walk the same path I walked this morning, that lifetime ago, past the main security desk, now manned by a single, bored night guard, toward the executive turnstiles. I stop. I am standing on the exact patch of Calicotta marble, the spot. I look up. Dome camera 4A. Its lens is a void. Its little red light is off. It is sleeping. I stand there, looking directly into the lens that recorded my humiliation and my victory, the silent, objective witness that held the truth. I give it a single, slow nod, acknowledgement, gratitude. Mara. His voice is a rasp. I did not hear him approach. My father is standing 10 feet behind me. He is not the chairman. He is just a man, in a rumpled, expensive suit, his tie loosened, his face a gray mask of exhaustion. I do not turn around. I keep my eyes on the camera. He steps forward, into my peripheral vision. He stops beside me. He is looking at the floor, at the spot where Sloane struck me. He raises a hand. It trembles, just as it did in the boardroom. He doesn't touch my face. He doesn't hug me. He just, for a brief, fractional second, touches my shoulder. His fingers are cold. I heard you? Just 4 words. It is not an apology. It is not an explanation. It is a confession. It is the bookend to the entire affair. It is his acknowledgement of my first whisper. He is saying, "I hear you now." I nod. Once, still looking forward. "I know, Dad." I walk away. I leave him standing there, alone in the middle of the lobby, a king in his empty hall. My phone vibrates in my pocket. The vibration is a cold, clean buzz against my hip. I pull it out as I walk toward the main glass doors. 2 automated system emails. From QSG HR System. Subject: Termination process. Complete. S. Archer, access, revoked, equity, frozen, devices, secured. From QSG HR system. Subject, termination process. Complete, P. Latham, access, revoked, equity, frozen, devices, secured. I delete them both. The digital ghosts, purged from the machine. I reach the massive 12-foot glass doors. I push the steel bar. The seal breaks, and the night air of Grayford hits me. It's cold. It cuts. The wind finds the last, faint, tender bruise on my left cheek, the one place that still remembers the impact. The pain is a dull, fading echo, a reminder of the price. I stand on the sidewalk, the city noise a sudden rush. I look up at the tower, a black spear against the dark sky. I open my secure email client one last time. To PwC Audit Team, lead, from M. Quinn at Quinn Stratagem.com, subject, FW, Vendor Sandbox, After Action Report, attached, QSG Sandbox, Final, PDF. All materials for your review. Complete transparency, as discussed. We look forward to a clean audit. I hit send, the final piece of paper, the last digital word. I lower the phone. The screen is dark, but for a moment, it catches the blue-white glare of a passing streetlight. It reflects my face. My hair is loose, messy from the 18-hour day. My eyes are tired. The bruise is a faint, purple shadow, but my expression is not one of victory. It is not sadness. It is not triumph. It is calm. It is the placid, steady face of a woman who has calculated the cost, paid the bill, and balanced the ledger. No smile is necessary. The black executive town car I ordered slides to the curb. The door opens, I get in, and the door shuts with a heavy, satisfying thud. The car pulls away from the curb. I do not look back at the tower. I do not look back at the man I left standing in the lobby. My elevator is descending. The heavy cables are humming. The stage curtain is closing. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm so curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect. Please share your thoughts on the story. And if you enjoyed it, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel and like this video. It makes a huge difference. And if you really want to support the story, please hit that hype button so this video can be heard by even more people.